The rates at which people are starting families has dropped to a massive extent over the course of, to an extent, the latter half of the 20th century, but it rapidly accelerated in the 21st century. And one of the main drivers of this that people report is economic stuff. Let's be honest, you probably don't need me to run you through all the examples that there are of young people saying, I can't get a home, I can't start a family, I can't do any of these things that my grandparents or my grandparents' parents or whoever were able to do. I'm giving up. I'm just gonna live for myself because I can't do any of these things. South Korea is really ground zero. It's such a powerful example of how a society can extremely quickly experience a massive demographic collapse. The majority of the young people really have completely given up on having a legacy, having a family, owning homes. You know, look at apartment prices in Seoul. It's crazy. In Japan, you have what they refer to as the grass-eating men. You know, East Asia is really getting the shaft on this one. But the whole world is experiencing it to some extent, except Africa. Africa's sitting pretty, and so is India. Right here in the US of A, people refer back to the 1950s, back in the Eisenhower era of prosperity, where Americans statistically had a greater portion of their salary being disposable than ever before and at any time since. And they point to then, you know, people who grew up then, they don't understand what it's like now being unable to buy a house for 8 potatoes. And it's true that back then, on paper, getting the things that you needed to have a family, a house, a car, etc., was significantly easier than it is now. But that's because what people nowadays think of when they think of a house, a car, when they think of their necessities, they're not thinking of what people in the 1950s were thinking of. Look up, I dare you, what a house was like back in the 1950s. Not every house had air conditioning. Not every house had all of the appliances and all of the furniture and all of the amenities that we have in our homes these days. Houses in general were a lot smaller. And yes, people did have families of significant sizes in houses that are a lot smaller than we have these days. Think about what an American considers to be the baseline for having a large family. They're thinking, okay, I'm gonna have 6 kids, which is way more than the vast majority of Americans are thinking of when they're thinking of having a family. But if they were to have 6 kids, they're thinking like, damn, I could never do that. I would need to get a house with 7 bedrooms, you know, the master and then the 6 bedrooms for each of the 6 kids. That's not how the vast majority of people think. That's not how people thought in America even back in the 50s. And if you go, for instance, to Israel, all the Haredim, they have tons of kids. They don't live in houses, period. The vast majority of the Israeli population lives in small apartments. And no, it's not your neighbor's flat here in America. Oh yeah, I live in an apartment, but it's like a 1,500 square foot apartment. No, I'm talking like 1,000 square feet or less and like 6, 7, 8 kids. Granted, that's not the experience for everybody there, but that's the experience for a lot of people. They call houses villot, something like that. I forget exactly. But it basically translates to villas. If you live in a house, not a big house, if you live in a house, you're well off. As Americans became wealthier and wealthier and wealthier, and in terms of what we actually do have, when you look at the state of the products and how many products we have these days, we are wealthier than we were in the 50s. Okay, maybe not exactly as wealthy as our peak before 2009 or whatever, but even then you could argue, because of technological advancements, because those still happen, that we are still wealthier than then. The standards of what we expect out of life, what we expect out of the economy, what we expect to have outpaced even that economic advancement. Back in the 1950s, people had a house more easily because they were willing to lower their standards to, well, what the reality was at that time, which was that you would have a house that has pretty sparse amenities and is really not that big compared to modern day standards. But as the economy shrinks, as things may get a bit harder economically than they were at our peak in the earlier 21st century, people are not willing to reduce their standards because then they're living like a caveman. They're living in poverty and they're not willing to do that. They're not willing to make that sacrifice in order to have a family. So they say, I can't get what I need to have a family because what they consider to be a need for having a family is stuff that they actually do not need. I know I mentioned it before, but I really want to hammer this point home here. Do you have any grasp of just how historically unique and honestly strange. The idea is that every single kid needs to sleep in their own room. Do you have any idea what kind of a luxury that is? And it's considered to be something that you need to have in order to have a family in America. Ask anybody who grew up where they shared a room with their siblings, because there are plenty of people, ask an immigrant, ask a Jew, whoever, like, they're not messed up. They grew up perfectly fine. Another couple important points. First of all, cars. Back in the 1950s, people had a car. There's this assumption these days, you need to have 2 cars if you're gonna have a family, because the mom needs to get around, the dad needs to get around. If one parent's driving the kids somewhere for a day trip, the other one needs to be able to go around and do errands or whatever. That was not a thing in the 1950s. 1 car. You might say that's because there was only one breadwinner in each family in the 1950s, but that's not true to the extent that most people think it is. Cars back then were also significantly smaller. Those cars could still fit the exact same number of people. You know, a station wagon could fit as many people as an SUV, but the key word here is fit. People think they need to have a car where every single person in the car is comfortable. And you don't need that. You think all 5 children were comfortable back in the day in a station wagon? No, they were a little cramped and they just shut up and they dealt with it. And yeah, if you're going on a bunch of long trips, long drives in your car, which people take for granted in America these days, then yeah, it's gonna kind of suck unless you have an SUV that costs all those big fat American dollars. But why are you going on those trips? That's one of those things that people factor into the cost, family trips and traveling and whatnot, when it comes to deciding whether or not they're going to have a family. You don't need those things. The last big thing I want to bring up is the wedding industry. You need to spend 3 months' salary on an engagement ring. You know who invented that rule? The De Beers Diamond Cartel, because they wanted to sell more diamonds during the Great Depression. Do you know how much the average wedding costs? Tens of thousands of dollars in America, and those are treated as necessities. It's not factored in the cost as like, this is what I need to do if I want to have a luxurious wedding, or if I want to live a luxurious lifestyle. No, if I can't buy these things, I can't get married. I can't have children. In reality, if you were to accept the standard of living and go without the amenities and luxuries, because traveling is a luxury, it's not a necessity. Having 2 cars and having a big car at all is a luxury. It's not a necessity. Having a large house is a luxury. Even if you have a lot of kids, it is not a necessity. If you were willing to go without these luxuries, you would find that it is, in fact, easier than it has ever been to afford what you need, what you actually need in order to get married and have a family. It is harder than it was not even that long ago, to a moderate extent, to live with those luxuries. But if your inability to afford those luxuries is what keeps you from getting married and from starting a family, be honest with yourself. Be honest and say to yourself and to others, I'm not getting married because I would rather have these luxuries than give them up in order to build the future that I want to build. I am willing to sacrifice that future in order to be able to live a luxurious life on my own and maintain those things that I don't need to have. At the end of the day, the heart of the problem is not that economic scarcity or economic trouble increased. It's because people's expectations for the kinds of amenities and luxuries they're going to live with in their day-to-day life increased faster than economic prosperity did.